What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with the one, the only Morten Jensen of the NBA podcast fame, of Yahoo Sports fame, of Forbes fame, and of course, what he's most known for, OnlyFans celebrity. It is that time of the week where we have our crossover episode delayed a day because our schedules are all over the place, but it is still coming at you. We're about to talk about, as Brian Toporek calls it, the Mickey Mouse March-ish sort of turnarounds in the NBA. A lot of these teams, they've turned things around like it's been longer than March, but some of them, hashtag Phoenix Suns, are only entering this podcast because of March. And we're just going to discuss some things we noticed or things we're thinking about and ultimately just ask each other, is this real? Do we buy into it or not? Uh, but before we get started, Mort, how are you feeling about this exercise?
Well, because it's a Mickey Mouse March and because all of this is so volatile, I don't feel good at all. Like you have to make so many on the spur like observations and things change on almost a nightly basis. So like I can guarantee you I will say something during this podcast that where I'll be theorizing something and you'll just say, "No, actually that's not it." And I'll be like, "Okay, cool." Because it's moving fast in the NBA right now. It's moving really fast. Everything is crazy. You have so many teams that are just kind of saying, "Screw it, we're not in it. We're just gonna play crazy ball." Like we have a term over here, which is not necessarily polite in any way. It's something we called Indian ball, and it refers to Native Americans, not Indian people, and it means just everything is fast paced. Everything is like balls to the wall. Things move quickly, and that's what we're seeing in the NBA right now. We're seeing a lot of fast-paced offenses. We're seeing a lot of games that are like in the 140s, and I have no idea, Dan, what's up and down. So I'm very insecure about this podcast. Very glad you were doing this. Yes.
I've seen a lot of sort of talk about, and this is a separate conversation. We shouldn't even get into it, but how do you fix March basketball or post All-Star break basketball in the NBA? And I've seen a lot of proposals that are kind of centered around or built around, excuse me, like the lottery stakes. And I thought John Hollinger recently made a very salient point in something he wrote for The Athletic, which was let's say you just removed the lottery system from the equation and there was just like some sort of different type of setup. What are the Wizards playing for at this point anyway?
Mhm.
It's just like there's almost I don't know what the way would be to how do you make March basketball more meaningful in the NBA. If you're saying let's change the lottery rules to less incentivize tanking, I guess you're then banking on, oh, these teams will go hard from the jump more, and that will in turn increase the value of the regular season. I honestly just think that if you want to make games more meaningful longer into the season, you need to have fewer games. That's the
Yep.
only thing
Yep.
that I haven't thought enough about it. It's just something that's ever since I saw what John Hollinger said a few days ago, I thought it was an interesting point because it does make, as of right now, makes our jobs tougher. Because the first team we're going to talk about, I will give you an exact example as to why it's so tough to evaluate what they're doing. So it's I don't have the answer, so I want to make that clear. But I think that some people make it too much of a binary case where it's just if you got rid of the draft or if you changed the lot, like use the lottery wheel or something, or like have a tournament to determine who gets the number one pick, which would just never work
That would
because
never. No, I
no, you're
hate
gonna
that.
have players fighting for
The
like their team to
replacement.
replace them. Yeah. So I don't have the answer, but it is fascinating to think about that a lot of it just comes back to, well, you need to de-incentivize tanking. It's okay, de-incentivize tanking. If a team is bad, they're not going to have any reason to risk healthy players.
Right.
Like if you were the Wizards, this is just the perfect example. Why would you play Chris Middleton 40 minutes in a game right now? Like forget about your lottery odds. Why would you when you have nothing to play? You wouldn't, because that would hurt his trade value if he gets injured.
Yep.
So, assuming he has any trade value left. That's my little spiel. Are we ready to talk about our first team?
Absolutely.
The Atlanta Hawks, more. They've had some stuff going on since the beginning of February. They are fifth in offense.
Yep.
Notably, since the start of March, though, as we record this, they are 8-3, with also a top 5 offense in March. You have Onyeka Okongwu shooting well from 3. That's from the start of February. Dyson Daniels shooting well from 3 since the start of February. But in this month, Zachary Risacher, by the way, is killing it. I think that he's
Mhm.
probably a first-team all-rookie lock now, and it wouldn't shock me if some people pick him for Rookie of the Year. I will say these are the teams that they've beat as part of their 8 wins. The shorthanded Pacers twice, the Sixers, the tanking Sixers twice, the whatever you want to call them Hornets twice, and the Warriors without Steph. So those are just some of their victories there. I what do you sort of make of what you've like as maybe stood out about individuals on this team, whether it's Dyson Daniels or Okongwu or Risa Shea? I know some people are still concerned about Trey Young, like just still a phenomenal passer, but it does feel like he's kind of lost a step and he's been dealing with he's had like an Achilles injury basically all year,
He
right?
has. Yeah, he has.
So
And I actually want to highlight Trey because he's been more efficient in the month of March, for example. He was under 40% from the field all throughout the year. He's cracked that. He's come back up. I think he's taking smarter shots right now. I think he's still a phenomenal playmaker. We're looking at 26 points, 11 assists over the past 10 games. 44% from the field isn't great, but it's better than what we've seen all year long. Hitting 94% from the foul line. Like, he's been a pillar of efficiency. Yeah, the turnovers are still high, but it's Trey Young. Like, we can't expect him to fix everything in the span of 10 games. So I do want to highlight that Trey Young, even with an injury, has been better, and they needed him to. Like, if you told me that the Hawks would go on this mini run after Jalen Johnson went down with the season-ending injury, I would have told you to, like, nope, like, you're crazy. They're right here. I find it amazing that they have like this depth that they can still go to, and they keep going at it. Like, Karis LeVert has done well. Okongwu, as you highlighted, Zachary Ricochet has been like a Swiss Army knife who sort of had to fill in for Jalen Johnson a little bit, which I think has gone pretty well. Kudos to the Hawks.
yeah, I don't know. The offense, I think I could definitely buy. And like with Trey Young's efficiency, we do have to account for just the injury. If you're looking at like what he's doing going downhill, but I also just sort of wonder how much of it, if you're looking at his 3-point percentage, where 30 sub 32% still since February 1st, still sub 34% in the month of March, excuse me. You just don't have like the personnel, like even if you're playing well and the offense is fifth or whatever, there's not a ton of secondary playmaking on this team without Jalen Johnson. You basically have Karis LeVert at this point. It helps a bunch that he's now hitting his threes, kind of like he was in Cleveland for them. But you just don't have a ton of like teammate gravity on this roster, and so I think that that's probably might factor into some of his efficiency struggles as well as the injury. Still think he's a transcendent playmaker with this team, though. I think I might be a little bit higher on Ricochet than I was a couple months back. But what is there any like long term or like looking into the playing and the postseason stuff that you think you can take away and say, all right, like I feel really good about this, because this is one of the teams I've struggled with where again, when you're looking at March specifically, I just don't know how much stock you can place in what they're doing, even though I think
Right.
the blueprint is there where, okay, a team piloted by Trey Young, even without Jalen Johnson, if you told me they were a top 5 offense, yeah, I'm going to believe you. But kind of the machinations by which they've gotten there is just, I would have expected Trey Young to be going nuclear. Okay, 11 plus assists, sure. But I would have been thinking that he'd be shooting like
30 plus. Yeah.
60% on twos, 37% on threes or something.
Yeah. So I hate that you brought up Ricochet and then asked me the question, what do you see like that could be a staple? Because now I feel like I'm piggybacking off of your point, but it's Ricochet. Look, he is this what 6'9", 6'10", multiple position defender who's getting he's getting a touch from the 3-point line. Like, he's starting to get that touch going. He's starting to understand he's got a size advantage. Still needs to see him more established on the glass, I think. Still needs to see him do some of the stuff that like is going to round out his game. But like, good Lord, he's 19 years old. So like, maybe let's let him be 19 years old. But what he's doing and how we're seeing him progress in the moment is something that the Hawks can absolutely take into the play-in or the playoffs, and especially in the long-term future. To have a guy like him who can just sort of play the 2, the 3, and the 4. And by the way, I got a little ahead of myself. He's actually listed at 6'8". He feels longer, though. He feels longer. That's just
I'm gonna say he's 6'9" from now on. Don't worry,
right?
he's 6'9".
Yeah. Can we just like, yeah, I'm down with that. Like, he's 19. He's gonna grow as well. It's fine. We're just gonna call him 6'9". I think he is a guy you can look at to be very influential as a two-way wing going into the final stretch of the year and beyond.
The thing yeah, and I would agree with everything you said. The fact that he's so plug and play on both ends of the floor is
Yeah.
big time. He's shooting a little bit better on drives, but I'd like to see more on-ball rim pressure from him or maybe the ability to generate more free throw opportunities, and I don't know
Yeah.
if he has that type of on-ball gear in him, and now I think for the setup of this team, that's fine because you have Trey Young, you have when you have a healthy Jalen Johnson. The other thing that I would like to call out, I'm still not sure what to make of their defense sort of long term, but I think that you can kind of see the outlines of what they're trying to build around Trey Young, where it's like they want to surround him with shooting and defense, and they're trying to find that one higher end secondary playmaker, or at least a ton of two-way versatility.
Yeah.
I think they've taken steps in that right direction. What I think could be sneaky huge for them, certainly during the regular season, but maybe during the playoffs, if we're talking about Onyeka Okongwu, if you're getting like reliable floor spacing in the front court from the Niang spot and from the Okongwu spot. And by reliable floor spacing, I mean if he's going to take 2.5 attempts per game and shoot well above average on that, in the playoffs again, I don't know what that does, but that really opens thing up for a team that has Jalen Johnson, who we know is not the strongest shooter. And so that would just be something I kind of a Kongwu specifically because I view him as just I feel like George Niang might be a placeholder. He certainly could be a trade candidate this summer if they're looking to make upgrades or change things up. I also don't view him as a playoff guy, but that's something that becomes huge if they can get like somewhat reliable floor spacing out of that second
Yeah.
front line spot, it really opens things up for Jalen Johnson when he returns next year.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic about the Hawks moving forward. It's a shame they don't have their own draft pick, that they don't possess those and aren't in control of those, because it feels like they're at this point where they can really use like cheap assets who are potentially drafted somewhat high to really round out their roster. That's a negative. That said, with Ricochet in place, with Jalen Johnson sort of coming out of nowhere last year and continuing that trend, showing he's not just a 1 year blip, that's huge. Okongwu, I love Okongwu. I've talked him up for years, and I do think that now that him being able to get that three ball down a little bit more, that should allow him to also play the four in some stretches, because I don't think he's a full time five. I think he's a part time five who needs to be able to play 4 minutes, because his rebounding, his defense, his versatility, if that could be flanked by like a real rim runner who's not Clint Capella, who's younger and more influential, then I think they have the makings of a defense that could actually make some noise.
Yeah, I probably don't buy him as some it depends on who the 5 is in that scenario
Right.
for me. Otherwise I don't really view him as a 4, but so with the Hawks, on a scale of 1 to 10, like how much do you buy into kind of like their recent surge? I think it makes me higher. I would say like a 6 or I'm feeling like a lot better about their future, and I just don't know how much it means in the short term because I would pick them to come out of the play-in anyway, just when you kind of look at the candidates that like them in Orlando just seem locks to it. Like maybe Miami could make some noise and maybe feel a little bit better about that. I don't think what they're doing right now makes me feel that much better about them in the short term.
No, so in the short term, is it fair to say I don't really care, because it's just not realistic to expect them to make a run even if they do make it into the postseason. Like it's just
You're going to lose to the Cavs or the Celtics. Like end of story.
right. Exactly. So like I'm not even concerned about the rest of the year, like their postseason success, whatnot. I'm it's not to write them off. That's not what I'm trying to do, but it's just like I'm not putting those level of expectations on them. So like you, I'm gonna look beyond this year. I'm looking ahead to next year. I'm gonna give them a solid 7.5.
Ooh, look at you. I'll go 6.9 as a reflection of how tall
6.9.
Zachary Ricochet actually
Nice.
is.
Love it. Yep. And there's definitely no other connotations we can use there with 6'9".
Our next team, the team which you root for, the strongest, the hardest, to which you are just most loyal, your Chicago Bulls. More, how are we feeling about it looked like they would kind of pivot into sort of like some tanking thing after the trade deadline, but no, like they're just look, more, they're not even probably going to finish like they're in contention for and they've got a nice little hold on the 9 seed. Like, what if they work their way up to the 8 seed? We're not talking about a 10 seed Bulls team here. But for them, they're 12th in offense, 13th in defense, and they're what are they, 8-3, 7-3 in March as well. Uh, Josh Giddey has hit three. Josh Giddey's actually not hitting as many threes as he was, but he's still hitting them. Kevin Herter not hitting as many of his threes, but they've just gotten like these like monster performances from a lot of, kind of their reserve players or the players that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Yeah, of course, Kobe White driving success, but Josh Giddey specifically, I know you just recently recorded with friend of the podcast, Jason Pat, from the Cash Considerations podcast about these Bulls. How you feeling? How you feeling about this team?
Feel about my Chicago Bulls,
Yeah.
apparently. Yeah, I hate you, by the way. That's how dare you. No, look, so this has been an active week for me in regards to the Josh Giddey discourse, because 75% of his shots on the year have been wide open, like just completely wide open. Or sorry, 3-point shots specifically, his 3-point shots. So you have to ask yourself this question. Do you trust Josh Giddey's 3-point percentage to be consistent throughout next year and the years beyond, when right now it's virtually all wide open? Because when they're contested, his efficiency drops down into the low to mid 20s, which is really bad, by the way. I do think he has solved some things. Like, I'm not negative on Giddey just to be negative on Giddey. That's not how I operate. I do think his slashing game, his driving game has grown better. I do think him just realizing he's 6'8" is a major asset. Him getting to the line more is literally him having solved a problem that he had before. So kudos to Josh Giddey for having done that. The shooting, and I'm guessing the Bulls is going to evaluate him off of that in large part. I'm just not ready to commit to that belief yet whatsoever. Like, again, when they're wide open like they are, and defenses are also kind of giving him that shot, I'm not ready to commit. I'm not. I want to talk about Kobe White, though.
On the Giddey note, just to add,
fair.
the shooting is certainly rickety. I can buy into the idea that he will shoot like an above average clip from three, because teams, look, he could shoot 45% for the life of the season. Teams are still going to leave him open because the volume has never been super high. He's under 5 per 36 minutes still. But I think what I'm more skeptical of is, let's just say he continues to shoot really well from three for the rest of his career. That adds value for sure.
Yep.
The reason I'm low on him is just defensively. Like,
Yeah.
if he has to spend more time guarding stationary threes and fours, it becomes this limiting construct as you go about building your team. And I think that's actually, sometimes I think we lose the plot where it's, yeah, Giddey shooting matters. If he's going to continue to ebb and flow from three over the course of each season, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at his efficiency for his career post All-Star break versus pre All-Star break,
I know where
his
you're
true
going with this.
his true shooting percentage increases, like from pre All-Star to post All-Star every year, by like
Yeah.
7 points. That's freaking huge. And look, he was only in the playoffs once with OKC. He just didn't play as he was under 20 minutes a game, like when he was last year. So I think you're right to be skeptical. I'm more skeptical about, even if he's hitting his threes, I still think there's a cap on his value because of the defensive restrictions that he kind of foists upon your lineups.
Right. See, now we're getting into the thick of things. This is where I am also very, very skeptical. So let's wrap up the Giddey thing before we move on to Kobe White, who I'm very positive about, by the way. In terms of the Giddey, the entire narrative right now amongst Bulls fans is primarily dominated on, oh, is he good enough now to the point where you can build around him? He's not scalable, or not bendable is probably the better word. He doesn't bend defenses off ball whatsoever. Like, you have to tailor a very specific lineup around him where you close all of his weaknesses and kind of highlight or emphasize his strengths. I sort of compare the situation to Zion in New Orleans, who, like, he's such a unique player. He's so difficult to build around, but the talent level with Zion compared to Giddey is like 20 times better. So, like, the Bulls are right now considering building around a guy who might even, like, struggle to start on most playoff teams. That's fair, right? Like, would he start on the Celtics right now? I don't think he would. Would he start on the Cleveland Cavaliers? I don't think he would. Like, there are a lot of teams he wouldn't start on. And the Bulls are considering building around him, knowing full well all these warts are in place. They are setting themselves up for one hell of a task if they have to tailor an entire roster around Josh Giddey, who remains unathletic. Like, yeah, granted, he's got smarts, he's got court vision that makes up for a ton of it. Absolutely.
When the floater can fall, I can buy into him hitting his floaters. Yeah.
All right, cool. But, like, what is the top tier? what is the top tier potential there? Like, what is the top tier ceiling in building around Giddy again, who can't be bendable in that way? And the issue is, if you had like a real number one guy, like a superstar or sorts, he's not a number two guy because again, off ball, he doesn't have the gravity, he doesn't have the volatility, he doesn't have all of these elements that are so crucial to being a number two guy. So it's like, I know a lot of Bulls fans have like, oh, Mort is just hating on Josh Giddey for no reason. Like, no, I think there are genuine concerns here about taking Josh Giddey in a vacuum and then sort of taking that vacuum with those stats, those inflated stats right now, and putting him in as quote unquote the new franchise leader. I think that is like 2,000 bridges too far. I think it's just, I can't get there with the ideology of trying to build around Josh Giddey, and I don't see him functioning particularly well as like a secondary option whatsoever.
I I would agree with you. I probably think it's a little bit easier to build around Zion than you do. I just think the Pelicans haven't gone about it very properly. My whole thing would be, I guess I'm so detached in the sense of I haven't seen anything about the Bulls viewing him as like their cornerstone. I think uh, that's effing crazy. If they view him as sort of a cornerstone type player, that is beyond bonkers. And if there's insofar as they have a cornerstone player on this team already, like the answer is the player that you're about to talk about, and that would be Kobe White is the better
Yes.
candidate for that.
Oh, I want to talk about Kobe.
You like that
Actually,
segue?
I did. I love that. You're very good at segues. Kobe White, I just wrote a major article about him over at Yahoo. Will be out Thursday. So if you're listening to this podcast, like, I don't even know when this is going to air, but like Thursday, it's going to be out. He's averaging 29.3 points per game over the last good chunk of game. I actually don't remember. Like, it was a long article, a fair chunk of games. He has been outstanding. He started the year off a little bit sluggish, especially from an efficiency standpoint. I think he has morphed into becoming one of the best plug and play guards in the NBA. Like, he is one of those players who can consistently create on his own, as well as what Giddey couldn't or still can't, bend defenses as an off-ball player. Like, every single defensive line looks at him when he doesn't have the ball. They look at him when he has the ball. Like, there always has to be an eye on him wherever he is on the court. Like, obviously he's not Kevin Durant, but he's got some similar inklings in the guard, like in a guard variety of being able to influence a basketball game without necessarily spending a lot of time on the dribble. He doesn't have to, dribble 26 times before he gets a shot up. He can move off ball. He can catch and shoot. He can go pull up. He can score in so many different variety of ways. He's also adept at running an offense, even though it's not his primary strength. I think this guy is bound for one hell of a pay raise in 2026. And I'm questioning if he's going to decide to stick with the Bulls, which is also what the piece is going to be about. Because as I think I've also told you on this podcast before, the 140% extension limit will kick Chicago's ass on this one. Absolutely. They can't afford to keep him around. And given that very few teams in the league will have cap space this summer, I'm pretty sure right now it's like only Brooklyn that's a lock, right? Like an absolute lock to have cap space.
Yeah, they're the only lock. There's other teams like Detroit, San Antonio can maybe get there, but yeah, they're
right. Like, so if there's a team out there that would want to trade for Kobe, they almost have to have cap space so they can go the renegotiate and extend route to not risk ending up in the same situation as letting him go into unrestricted free agency in 2026. So again, the Bulls actually did a good job. I actually think the Bulls, to their credit, are getting unnecessarily slaughtered here because the rule is dumb. Like, they did a good job. The Bulls' task, every team's task, is to get players in at below market value because that's how you optimize your own cap sheet. They did with Kobe White, who's earning $12 million this year and will earn $12.8 million next year. He's arguably the best non-rookie contract in the league. Arguably. He's right up there among the candidates. So they did a good job, but they're getting penalized in the sense they can't extend him to his full worth. I do think these rules need to have an overhaul because teams are going to lose players because of this rule.
Yeah, that's something that's going to need to be the essentials or something that'll have to be revisited. I would echo much of what you said about him. 86th percentile in on ball gravity and 95th percentile of off ball gravity. So nice little balance. I probably don't know that I trust him to run in offense as much as you do, but I'm also open to the idea of, well, if you put better talent around him, that might open things up a little bit more for him. And I think that I'd be curious to see like what he looks like with more like a different type of the like center look, where it's
Yep.
like the Bulls don't really have that in their prime, like more of a rim runner guy, like you have Jalen Smith and you have Nikola Vucevic. So that I'd like to see. But yeah, he's going to get paid. I think he's been great. I don't my in terms of my read on the Bulls situation though over this stretch, when you look at the level of competition that they face, like kudos to them for fighting and like the level, like what they're beating the teams in front of them, and you're getting standout performances from Vooch. You've gotten like some just nice moments from a Dalen Terry, like being able to,
Right.
unearth those later in the season. Trey Jones has been pretty good for them. They've gotten good minutes at times from Zach Collins. We've even had like Patrick Williams had a couple standout performances. I just don't think this functionally changes how I feel about them in any way, shape, or form.
Nope. And that's the issue, right? Because here's the thing. They actively said they don't want to go through the draft. They don't want to build through the draft. They want to be a middle team and then suddenly strike gold. And I'm not sure how. It's the old South Park meme, steel underpants, question marks, 0.3 profit. That's basically the plan they're employing. And it's difficult because I don't want to sit here and criticize their players, because the players are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're winning, they're playing at a fast pace, they're taking good shots. I think the roster that Chicago has, or rather the players individually speaking that the Bulls have, are very appealing players in many ways, shapes, and forms. But the overall project that they're going about is just, the mindset is all wrong. Like, how do you improve if you refuse to build through the draft? You have major contractual elements coming up both this summer and next. And you also have some debt weight with Patrick Williams. Like, I've come around. I'm no longer a believer. I have sold my last stake on Pat Will Island. Love the guy. Like, he sounds like one of the most sympathetic guys I've ever seen or heard speak. But like, from a player perspective, I'm out. I'm out. I'm out.
So you wouldn't have given him a player option last summer, is what you're saying?
I was actually, look, I'm owning up to that one because I thought that the deal was actually pretty decent. I was one of the people who thought, that not that DeMar was limiting his game, because that, I always thought that was a little too ridiculous. But I did think, with DeMar out of the picture, not squeezing the ball as much as he was, not, just milking the clock as much as he was, that would free up Pat a little bit more. So I actually thought the contract at face value when I first heard of it was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's pretty good. He's going to be a lot better. I'm just laying my ass down flat and saying mea culpa.
I don't know whether it's an indictment on him or the organization that in a year where, okay, you got rid of DeMar DeRozan over the offseason, I know Giddey comes in, then you trade Zach LaVine, and just like they have not materially expanded his offensive role. And I think that says all that needs to be said there. Our next team, Mort, this is more of a season-long feel-good story. There
Yes.
is no better story. You could talk about the Blazers as a comparable story, but the Pistons all year, even after losing Jaden Ivey, they are on here though, because since February 1st, this isn't even Mickey Mouse March, Mort. Top 4 net rating, 6th on offense, 1st on defense. They are like, I've been amazed at how well they've been doing over the past like 2 months or so. Just like, this is a team that's really focused on getting back in transition. They're missing shots, like they're not sort of lagging. They're making sure they get back. Malik Beasley on an absolute heater. Cade Cunningham, everything that we've talked about in the past still applies to what he's doing. Fred Katz of the Athletic did a nice little uh, like piece or like blurb on like his budding post up game. I think what's been big for him during this stretch, continuing to show a lot on defense, but just like his role on offense is a little bit different ever since they started using Asar Thompson differently and brought in Dennis Schroeder. He's getting like these in-game breaks, fewer dribbles per touch, lower time of possession, slightly more of his baskets are coming off assists. The thing I wanted to highlight before I threw it to you,
Mhm.
the thing that I'm taking, like, I'm into the Pistons to where no, I don't want to see them start trading future first round picks all over the place and try and get a star in here this offseason. They've clearly built something in place. And I think that Asar Thompson during this stretch has kind of reinforced that if he's going to be healthy. His efficiency from the perimeter is always going to kind of be what it is. But like when you can get him going downhill in transition or coming out of a screen, he's shooting 60% from two during this stretch. That's up from 56.4%. The bigger thing for me, 59% on drives, up from 41%. And then he's averaging 4.5 assists per 36 versus 2.8 per 36 from before February 1st. And a couple of the big differences for him, yeah, him bringing the ball up more, that's a big deal. But also just like when they can get him the ball off movement. So if like he's going to take a handoff from Jalen Duren, you get him going downhill or just live dribble, whatever. Like he makes really good reads against scrambling defenses in the half court. And so I don't know if he's ever going to be the type of guy that you want to break down a defense. If he is, my God, it's just over. Like this guy's going to be like, I don't like it'll that and the 3 point, like that or the 3 point shot coming along would be huge. I think if he was going to be also, if he was going to be eligible for it, which I do not believe he will, he would be an all defense candidate for sure. I've been so encouraged though what I've been seeing with the way the Pistons are using him and how he's executing on offense. And if they can continue to kind of prop up the spacing around him, I really think that there's going to be something there. And I still view him personally as the second most important player, like in that building behind Cade.
There was a story during his rookie season about how the Pistons were looking at his jump shot as a process that would probably last a couple of years. Like they're basically trying to break it down step by step and like try to get things right. If he gets that perimeter shot and can just use that as leverage, I'm not even saying he needs to be high volume, but like if he can just take 4 or 5 triples per game at like a league average rate, so he forces guys to come out and guard him from out there. Oh man, like his first step, it's ridiculous. Like when he gets like you just mentioned the triple handoff scenario with Jalen Duren. Do you see how much when as soon as he grabs the ball, do you see like how quickly he takes that first step? And then
I
he has
don't because it's too quick for my eyes to
right,
catch.
right. But he even has this presence of mind. He's got like the Luca D-cell thing going as well now, where not to the same extent, but like he will start off with this power dribble, throwing guys off, and then he'll just kind of stop on a dime, change direction. I mean, I don't know if he's ever going to be like quote unquote an offensive force, but I just never I don't think he's ever going to be like a negative minus because of the way he operates and because of how athletic he is. He's like the one guy where I'm like, okay, even if the 3 point shot is not going to come around, I might actually live with it. Like it would that make things easier for him and the team at large? Yes. Is it going to drastically limit him as a player? No, not really. No. I will give them 1 point of criticism though. One. I think Jalen Duren has become a little bit of an afterthought. Just a little too much. I'm not saying they have to feature him. I don't think they have to go like all Pau Gasol on him, where he has to have 15 post ups per game or anything nonsense like that. But I would like to see him get a couple more dump off passes near the rim. I want to see them try to set him up for more lobs. I want to get him just slightly more involved because I think that would add an interesting and very intriguing offensive layer to their offense, especially now that they're not a strong 3 point shooting team.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about Jalen Duren still. I go back and forth. He's definitely been better, and his touches are actually slightly up since the trade deadline, and some of the center floor decision making for him could be good. Uh, but I just don't know. And like I trust him more on the perimeter defensively now than I probably ever have. But as like your base rim protector, I don't know how I necessarily feel about that. I continue to be all over the place about Jalen Duren, but I think
Yep.
that he's probably more dynamic than he's like I ever would have considered him. I get well, at least with the exception of I was pretty Jalen Duren pilled after his first year, like just the physical tools. I
Right.
don't. They're gonna have a fascinating decision with his extension. Like that is going to be one of the toughest, I think, like meaningful player extension cases this summer.
I wonder if he even gets like an extension or he's going to be a restricted free agent next year.
I would have to. I think like if I'm the Pistons and he wants more than like 20 a year, 23 a year, like whatever 15% of the salary cap is going to be, I would just wait for restricted. You could match it if he's going to get the big
Right.
offer because restricted free agency has been a dud lately.
Yep.
And so if a team is going to give him an offer sheet, like a center specifically, a non-spacing center that has some defensive question marks still, then something has gone incredibly right, like
Right.
next year. And so I'd be happy to match it.
I do think he's gotten better defensively though over the course of this year. I want to give him that credit.
How do you feel about him as a base rim protector, though? Is this sort of a do you trust him as more of like that perimeter big, or you think that he's like a tried and true like backline guy?
No, so the backline stuff not yet, but I haven't closed the door on it. Like I do think for him it's about understanding timing. It's about understanding like when to rotate over. The defense, the perimeter stuff, I think is sort of. Oh God, I'm gonna set myself up here. It's sort of Bam-esque at times, not in this in the like. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying
No,
he's
no,
Bam.
I'm dying if everyone watching because I almost said the same thing, but I refrained from doing it.
Nice, love it. All right. Well, so I do think he's got the instincts out there, similar to like Bam is quicker on his feet. Like Bam, I think Bam's what do you call it? Hip mobility, like just the
Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever gonna match that. Yeah, you're right.
Like that's I obviously Durant doesn't have that, but I don't think he's that far off to the point where he's gonna suck on perimeter defense. I don't think that's ever going to be the case. I think he's super intriguing on that side. The backline defense, I think it's going to come. I'm going to be optimistic, Dan. I'm going to put on the optimism hat and say it's going to come. But like you, yeah, like we're 3 years in, we haven't really seen it consistently. There's some doubts creeping in. I'm not going to say there aren't.
I will say on a scale of 1 to 10, we're not buying the Pistons as championship favorites. I buy kind of just I mean, I don't even want to say a 10 because I'm like, well, I'm a little bit skeptical in parts of their offense. Like, they're not hitting their threes and they're still going to be in the top 7 during this stretch in offense. This is a 10. I buy the Pistons 11 out of 10 based off what we've seen.
That is fair. I have a hard time disagreeing with that.
The Golden State Warriors, very post Jimmy Butler-esque trade is what you want to isolate with them. How are you? I took the Pistons, so how are you feeling about the Dubs?
I'm feeling very good, but we have to set some rules to this, I think, because do I feel good about them as an NBA championship contender? Maybe not, but I feel good about them being far more competitive, post trade than prior to the trade. I think they've streamlined their offense a lot more. I love Jimmy as like the secondary ball handler. I think he's giving he's sort of extending Draymond's role a little bit, and he's also probably extended Draymond's window a little bit more as a player, which thank God, because I can't I will gladly wait around multiple years for Draymond to hit the TV screen as our next announcer. So keep playing, Draymond. That's fine. Play until you're 55. That's good for me. But I do think Jimmy has just sort of taking the load off everyone else a little bit more. And the fact that he can consistently get to the free throw line, I think you and I talked about this at some point. Like the last Warrior who could do that to the same extent was Corey McGetty, like a guy who could just consistently get to the foul line, get teams in, and get them in the bonus and give them this advantage. Defensively, obviously, Swiss Army knife for Jimmy, always been spectacular on that end. I believe them as a team to watch moving forward in terms of this is going to be a nice way for Steph to retire. I don't think there's another championship in it. I don't think they will ever lift the Larry O'Brien Championship Trophy again. Is it still named that? We're renaming awards all the time. It's still the Larry O'Brien Championship Trophy, right? That's still the same one?
No, that's what MLB teams compete for, more.
I want to make sure because I don't remember like the full list of the new awards. I just don't remember all the names, but
no, it's still the Larry O'Brien Championship Trophy. They changed like awards name, like some of the awards, but the O'Brien Trophy is the same.
Okay, cool. So, like I look at them as a team that's going to be far more fun to watch because they already are. They're going to be more competitive than before. They're going to have some series, either this year or next year, where they're going to put the fear of God into some team. But ultimately, I do think whatever Cinderella story they'll be on is going to come crashing down like at latest the second round.
I'm way higher. I would probably buy them at about an 8 because I do have some questions. I think that there's part of their playoff run could end up being very matchup dependent. I
Mhm.
think you could also talk me into them being the actual second best team, most threatening team in the Western Conference right
Oh
now.
wow. Oh
The
wow.
the
Okay.
the Nuggets have that claim to me right now.
Right. Yes.
But
Same.
I think when you're looking at ceilings, this Warriors team has a case for no, I would say I would put them third right now without hesitation. It's just like what's the
Okay.
third team that I'm most, fearing behind like there's OKC. Number two is debatable, but I have Denver still there with with a Jokic, of course. And then it's the Dubs for me. And I think, look, you mentioned the free throw stuff, and just to back that up, they're first in free throw attempt rate since the Butler trade. They were 29th beforehand. I think the bigger thing now, this matters more for the regular season than the playoffs, but it still matters for the playoffs. But they're a plus 17.6 per 100 when Butler plays without Curry. And now we're talking about almost 600 possessions worth of that playing
Mhm.
time. That's a big deal. And then like the real thing here, so you're buying Steph longer breaks, probably
Yeah.
even in game two. When you're like he was playing out of his mind before the pelvic injury, and then you could see that he was getting tired. But like the Jimmy trade, yeah, it might have reinvigorated him like psychologically, emotionally, but like it also just made his job a little bit easier, both when he's on and off the court. I actually think my bigger question, I am worried about, if you get into the minutia of okay, Quentin Post, excellent story. Clearly the most
Yeah.
important player in that building. Shout out Grant
Absolutely.
Hughes. But I, can he play in the playoffs? I think their best lineups were always going to be this way, but they're going to have to lean on going smaller even more come postseason time. And so that's maybe you can sprinkle more Kevon Looney in there. But I could see, Quentin Post has been very
Yeah.
important to opening up the floor when you have two non-shooters on the court. I don't know if that sticks when you're in the playoffs. Like, can you play him? And if you can, we're already seeing that the Kaminga minutes, the first two games felt like they were okay. And everything I've seen since, I just haven't really loved. They're a minus 8.4 per 100 when Kaminga plays with Jimmy. And again, even just looking at like, okay, you look at the limitations on Kaminga's shooting, sub 15% from three or whatever since his return, but he's also shooting 42.4% on his paint touches. That's down from 57.7%.
Mhm.
And just the game against the Hawks, Mort, no Steph. He didn't close. And so it's just like, this is weird. I'm not saying it'll become a distraction, but like Kaminga's kind of he's just an important cog in this machine for better or worse. And so that's a question I have, which is why I'd be a little bit more hesitant just because they are smaller. And so you would think like, if you're going to have Kaminga on the court, one, is the offense going to have enough spacing, especially if Quentin Post isn't on the court? Can you even think about playing him next to Draymond and or Butler during both of those guys for sure? Like if Post isn't on, like you can't even play technically all those four guys at the same time. I guess you could for a ton of minutes, but there's the offensive questions there, and then it's okay. Well, if you need to stagger him from the Jimmy Draymond minutes, what does that do to your defense? Because you're taking one of your two or three best defenders off the court during that stretch. Those are the big question marks, and why I haven't just said that I think that they're probably the second biggest threat to beat OKC in the West. And I think that relative to Denver, they're going to be, you look at Denver's size on the front line, Golden State just doesn't have that. And so, like, if you go up against a Minnesota, like Denver itself, like, I could see that being an issue. So I'm probably at like a 7.5, 8 of buying what we've seen since the Butler trade. And I would say before I throw it to you is I actually might, even though they'll be older, I might just be higher on what this means for them next year, having Jimmy Butler. Because if you can do something with Kaminga, whether it's a sign and trade or just like you have other pieces to move, like you've now given yourself what I would say is a more convincing title contention baseline than anything you had previously to this.
Yeah, I agree with that. You also outlined why I'm a little bit more skeptical about them because I don't think their depth is particularly impressive, and I understand that in the playoffs rotations tighten, but not to the point where you have to use 3 or 4 starters and just drive them into the ground. Like you still need, especially at their age, you need guys to kind of alleviate that. I question whether Kuminga is ready for that role. Like Moses Moody is a guy who I've liked for a long time. Do I trust him in a more important setting in a playoff series? I don't know the answer to that yet. I hope so. I would love to see him become a playoff performer. I think he's got, the skill set to do it. I think he's got at times the physicality to match up. I think he's got the mentality at times too. But then also he'll have those games where he doesn't play a whole lot. He'll check himself out. It's just like, I think they're the bench essentially, like the depth area is where I'm not really that trusting of how that is going to work out. I love your point about the future, though. The fact that they can go out and use Kuminga. No, but I get it. I get what you're saying, and it sounds funny because you're basically saying, three guys who live in the retirement village are going to be better next year. But you're right. You can actually go out and perhaps relinquish some talent because we can't get around the fact that Kuminga is talented. He's supremely talented, but you might have to sacrifice that for better fit. Just an optimized big man, whatever that is. Could it be that they go out and get Vooch to have like a inside outside post option? I don't know. Like I don't know who the right player is to get in there. But I do agree that there are better fits around the league, perhaps should be available. So we'll see. I think that's an interesting point. Like if they figure out like the stepping stone from like the bench to the starting lineup, like who can actually bridge that, then they're going to be fun as hell next year.
Your point about the depth is interesting because I actually really trust Moody based off what we've seen since the Wiggins trade in a playoff. Maybe not so much offensively, I'd have question marks, but defensively, especially if you have like Butler and Draymond there. And then I trust Pods for sure. And he's been, was he like 43% in the games that he's played in March?
There's a reason I didn't bring up Potts. I trust him.
But when you get into, I already mentioned Post and then like Hield, of like nobody should trust Hield. And then if you can't trust Kuminga, and I also think, look, Gary Payton II been spectacular. That's another player that, especially, what he's going to bring you offensively, but is he going to, on his three pointers a game, is he going to shoot 45% forever in a play? I don't know. So that's a really interesting point about their depth. But I think the fact that as long as Steph is healthy and you have Butler and Draymond, you can build some really nasty, like your core lineup, throw Moody and then Pods in there if you think he's his fifth. Like that's a really nasty like core lineup. It's just that core lineup can't play 48 minutes a game. And so how are you buying your minutes elsewhere is definitely like a question to ask. Our next team is the Indiana Pacers. This isn't a turnaround. This is more like a surge for them, and it's like kind of an extended one. But March, they've been a fucking heart attack, Mort, in March. I just want them. They played a semi-normal basketball game against the Timberwolves when they blew them out, and I know they've been shorthanded a couple times. I just want them to play. Like they're going to kill me. I was out on this team months ago. I said it. Then I was back in. I'm on record as saying I think they are the third most dangerous team in the East. And I think that's my question to you. And like the biggest thing I would highlight, aside from just Tyrese Halliburton balling here, is if you're trying to look at March specifically, 10th in points allowed per possession. Their 3-point defense has gotten very lucky, I would say. They are first in 3-point defense, which we know, even if you're affecting who's taking the shots and that type of shots, like to be first, there's noise there. But like the rim protection, teams are still getting there a lot, but like Miles Turner has been stopping, putting up better resistance there. I think Aaron Nesmith is just like a help defender, has gotten a lot better. Obi Toppin's been playing well for them. That would be a question for them in the playoffs, is how much Obi Toppin can you get away with here? This team is deep, though. They can play fast and physical, which I don't know, aside from Oklahoma City, like what are the teams that can consistently do that? I'm sure there are certainly answers. Like even like one doesn't necessarily spring to mind. It's like the Pacers having those buttons to push. But I guess I would ask you, is it like sort of, if you're looking for a thing to do, I need to buy or sell a surge from this team? Is it kind of like the recent defensive performance? Is it something else in net? Are you ready to even buy what I said to you a couple months or like a month and a half ago, that they are the third most threatening team in the Eastern Conference?
I'm just going to be completely honest with you. I don't know. I when I watch their games, they keep winning. They keep being in it late in games, even in the games that they lose. And like, it doesn't feel anything like out of the ordinary is happening for them to continue to win. Like they're just a well-oiled machine at this point. I think it's a combination of comfortability and it's the guys are getting healthy. Like the last time we talked about them, I was like worried about Tyrese Halliburton. I was like, you know what? I don't think the Pacers are going to be a lot better unless he turns into like the version we saw of him last year in the first half of the season, where he was averaging like 26 and 12. I thought he needed to become, that guy. And he's still dominating without putting up the raw numbers. And he's doing that just by having full control of the game. Siakam has been...
Oh, is 12 plus assists not enough raw numbers for you?
Those are fantastic. It's more the scoring punch, right? Where I'm been sitting there just thinking, oh, they're going to need him because you can't keep running things through Siakam. Like, can we keep trusting Benedict Mathurin to keep putting up those points totals? But like, as you said, the depth is there because then one night Obi Toppin goes off, then Andrew Nemhard has a good game, then Miles Turner's hitting his three. It's just I feel comfortable with them as a team because they just have so many places they can go to for a wide variety of production. Like Siakam, you can also ask Siakam to scale up the defense for a bit. Like obviously, you can tell Miles, look, today we're gonna have a pretty tough assignment in front of us. We need you to just drop back and block everything under the sun if they come close. Like it's Rick Carlisle just has all these buttons and dials that he can turn, and he does, and players seem to listen. I don't think there's just one thing that stands out. It's like the sum of all parts. It just kind of seems to work.
Yeah, there's optionality on this team, and I
Yeah.
think it's functional to the point where, you mentioned this before, rotation shrink in the playoffs, and I think Indiana will be no different. I think the Toppin thing might be like how many minutes of Obi Toppin can you get away with in the playoffs? Very matchup dependent there, but like I don't think like aside from him, so you go through the list of other guys that are getting regular minutes. Is Benedict Mathurin perfectly what you need from a wing spot? No, he can absolutely play in the playoffs. Neesmith, McConnell, Halliburton, and Siakam, of course, Turner. Like these are all just guys. Nemhard, Shepard too. Like getting spot. Like that's someone to come and give you different defensive looks for sure. Will he hit enough of his threes?
Yeah,
That's by the
that's
way, anecdotally. I just want all of Indy's quote unquote like good shooters to be hitting threes at the same time. It feels like that's just never
yeah.
happened this season. Like it's like two or three players are on heaters, and then like these other
Right.
three or four guys are not. But this team is just, and I mean, like they have. My favorite lineup of theirs is Neesmith, Nemhard, Halliburton, Turner, and Siakam. I think you can sub in Mathurin if you want sort of different looks there. Like
Right.
that, like that sort of base nucleus. Aside from Cleveland or Boston, I just don't know what team, if you're Indy, that you need to fear when those are like that is your go-to like 5 or 6, and like the way that you can mix and match and play it, and just again the two-way capability of that. So I buy like they again. This has been more of like a gradual surge. I don't know if I buy them as a top 10 defense, but when you're looking at their most important lineups, I think you can say I buy that they have a higher defensive ceiling than kind of floating around the bottom 10 and being an absolute sieve. I do still, even with their best lineups, I worry about them on the interior. Like even if if you're deterring shots at the rim, it feels like it comes at the expense of just like these high quality floater looks for other teams. But I'm it's funny. I was out on the Pacers. I don't remember what month it was. It might have been November, December, whatever. And now I'm Pacers pilled. How do you like that? And they did nothing at the trade that like it wasn't like this
Right.
team had any turnover. Like this is just something that's like been fixed in house, and I think I'll stand by it. I think I would rather see them like if we're talking second round matchups. I think that they would give more of a test to a Cleveland or a Boston than New York
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
Milwaukee.
Consistency, right? That is the word for them. Like it's the same level of effort every single game. Those are the teams that you need to worry about. The teams that surge in a way where they completely break their own pattern. They're going to come back down to earth. It never seems like the Pacers went up. Like they kept winning, sure, but like we're not seeing that attached to like wild individual performances or percentages that are suddenly skyrocketing out of nowhere. This is just like fixing small issues here and there, humming along, knowing who they are, knowing their own limitations. I would not want to play the Pacers in the playoffs.
No, I would agree. And I think look, even if you don't trust their defense, if they can continue to keep opponents out of transition, which if your offense is clicking, that's the way to get your defense set. It's just sometimes you'll have a chance to get set, and that'll make you better inherently. You certainly should feel better about their playoff stock. So I'm gonna say I'm like I went 11 out of 10 for the Pistons, but this is all relative. I would say like I'm probably a 9 on the
Yeah,
Pacers
that
scale
feels right.
out of 10.
That feels right.
Our next team, a lot of James Harden dealing with an ankle injury, but he's very, he doesn't receive enough credit for kind of having I'm just going to rub some dirt and spray some Windex on it and I'm going to be fine. I think we need to appreciate the load that James Harden has carried over the years more. But the Clippers, more, uh, man, they've been Bogdan Bogdanovic playing well. The half court offense
Yeah.
since February 1st is eighth. Like, that's a big deal for this team that we were concerned about. It's not just Bogdanovic is hitting his threes, by the way, either. He's shooting 56.7% on drives. The half court offense specifically is in the 86th percentile when you have Kawhi and Harden on the court. There's been some concerns about Norm Powell recently. I think that he has probably always struggled against more physical defenses, but he's coming back from like knee, hamstring stuff. Let's see if that normal, because I would think like his performance will normalize if he's healthy. Like, just as he's always been a valuable spacer and get downhill guy. So if you need him to do a little less dribbling, okay, fine. Defensively, there could be some challenges. Ivica Zubac might finish first team all defense, might finish in the top 3 of defensive player of the year. Mort, is there like, assuming that James Harden is going to be okay, like, is there like something here with this team where they're not a sleeping giant, but they're someone who could cause a ruckus in the West playoffs?
Well, I mean, yes. So I was probably a little bit too low on them for the most part of the year. I thought this wasn't a team that I would necessarily trust come playoff time. And I will also say I have been probably conditioned at this point to just expect that Kawhi Leonard just would not be much available, or even after his return that he would go down again. Again, knock on wood that doesn't happen. We love to see Kawhi on the floor. Uh, it obviously dramatically changes my answer whether Kawhi is available or not. Like, he is still their fully fledged superstar. What I think has been a major key for them all year long, not just in the recent stretch, is that the play of two guys in particular never kind of dropped down after their hot start. So Amir Coffey still hitting that three ball at a high rate, playing two-way basketball. Derek Jones Jr. also just keeping that train moving from his time in Dallas, where he became one of the better forward defenders in the league. They have just completely kept that thing going. Both of them, part-time starters. Well, all right, Derek Jones Jr. started for the most part of the season, but it's been in and out there. You need those type of guys to come in and give you the same production every single night. I think what's been interesting is how they've kept their roles intact despite some roster turnover. So like Bogdan Bogdanovic, we know he likes to handle the ball just to see he can move off ball for sure, but he also likes to play make. He likes to have the ball in his hand. Somehow, some way, Amir Coffey and Derek Jones Jr. was like, "Yep, we're down with it. That's cool. We're gonna allow him to come in and dictate some things. We're gonna play off of that." There's just team wide role acceptance, which is huge. Like, ask any coach at any level, and they'll say role acceptance is just alpha omega. It's one of the most important parts to success. They have gotten that. Subac is a good shout, by the way. He's been outrageous, just outrageous.
Even having just Nicholas Batum, that steadying hand, Chris Dunn, just absolute monster defensively. They've won. The offense looks choppy, and some of that might be if you're, Derek Jones Jr. is on the floor for some of that, and the way defenses guard him. He's hitting his threes at the moment. He's actually hitting more threes in the month of March than Norman Powell per game. How about that? But like the Ben Simmons and no big look, they've won those minutes. That's actually, when you look at some of the personnel they've had, again, the offense can get a little rough, but I've been impressed with a lot of those minutes. And I think it just gives them different buttons to push in the playoffs. I don't expect that to be, by the way, a crutch, what I'm saying, but like it does give you the word I keep coming back to, or that I've overused in the history of this podcast, optionality. I do worry, like, if James Harden is dealing with an ankle issue or anything moving forward. Like, again, hopefully he's fine. And he's been spectacular in March specifically. But I think, is it egregious to say Kawhi Leonard very much defines the ceiling of this team,
Yeah.
but like James Harden kind of defines their floor? Because I think like they've actually been pretty bad this year when Kawhi plays without Harden. And so I think because of the playmaking usage specifically that Harden can shoulder, that nobody else on this team, including Kawhi, can come close to shouldering. If you're dealing with any sort of a reduced version of him, it it has a pretty big impact on how far you could go. And so that's something I'll be monitoring. But if their offense is anywhere, like, it's been above average, if it's anywhere near league average with the defense, they are second in points allowed per possession against top 10 offenses. This is, if they get the right draw in the first round, I don't know that there's a team, like, if you told me they pulled off a first round upset against, I think anyone aside from the Thunder, I'd probably be like, wow, okay, like I believe it.
Yeah, Denver is one where I'm like, because
Jokic gets Zoo in foul trouble, and then you're kind of small. Yeah.
So the back line hurts. Denver is probably one, like OKC. Obviously, I agree with you. Like, but if it's Houston, for example, yeah, that's probably one where I'd be very open to the idea that the Clippers come out.
Because the offense does feel a little like I buy into like what we're seeing from Bogdanovich. It's okay, it might be unsustainably hot, but it's closer to what we know about him than what we saw in Atlanta when he was battling injuries and just not playing well at all. The Norm Powell regression hurts a little bit. I'm probably going to go like a 6 in terms, like, because what I'm looking at specifically is the offense with the we know the defense is for real, and the surge comes back to what is their offensive ceiling. I don't know if they can play like, because even during this since February 1st, they're not a top 10. Like being eighth in the half court's a big deal, help you come playoff time. I think I'm at like a 6, maybe a 6.5 of buying what we've seen from their surge.
That feels fair because they're of the teams that we've talked about so far. That's probably the one that I'm. It sounds horrible to say least high on, but like we're talking about the right direction.
You're higher on the Bulls?
Well, we didn't give them a grade, remember?
Yeah, I mean like if you're looking at the Bull, I'd probably go what, like a 2? Like what is it? Just like you have Vooch talking about like I might want to stay
-2.
here beyond this season. Yeah, a -2. That sounds like a good time to move on to our next team, which is the Minnesota Timberwolves, which I'm not even fucking sure if they belong here at this rate. They're 7th in net rating since February 1st. They do tend to play up to the level of their opponents, but then like they just turn in these clunkers. Kind of saw it against the Indiana Pacers the other night. They play down to the level of their opponents. I just don't know what to make of this team. I can't quit them because the talent is there. And when you look at like their top 7 guys, like the way that Julius Randle has played by and large, the way that Dante DiVincenzo is playing at the moment, like the top end talent is there. But I look at this team, they're so maddeningly inconsistent. 25th on offense in crunch time for the season. They've been slightly better recently, but still below average. Their starting lineup right now has a killer net rating. And so like that was, did you have a ton of conviction in that unit to begin the year? Jaden McDaniel's been better offensively, but I still think defenses don't care. Lots of up and down from Rudy Gobert on offense.
Yeah.
I think maybe the bigger storyline, and that's the thing that I'm kind of wondering if we need to, but I won't buy it in full, but like Anthony Edwards, we've seen the volume on the 3 is still there, still above 35% since February 1st, but not by much, like not shooting as well as he was before.
Right.
And we've even had like this season's been turbulent for him when it comes to finishing around the basket, but like he just is not the same level of finisher that he was last season. And like you can boil it down to, does that have anything to do with the front court? Does that have anything to do with the Gobert minutes? I mean, you isolate it. He's like, he's been a little bit better in the restricted area since February 1st, but he's in the 70th percentile of rim finishing this year versus the 94th last year. He's shooting 46% on twos with Gobert on the floor, 60.4% at the rim. And then when Gobert's off the court, that goes to 62% at the rim. So it's not like this huge difference. That's something I'm monitoring because it could be a spacing issue, but like if there's not the same level of burst or finishing there, it could be a difficulty issue. I think what's also hurt them, like he's still important, but they can't play Mike Conley as much, or at least they don't feel like they trust him to play as much more, and that can throw their offense for sort of a loop-de-loop. If you can't tell by that incoherent rambling, I'm all over the place on the Wolves.
Well, because the Wolves are. The Wolves are. Like, look, I was impressed with Julius Randle, by the way, because for him to actually be a positive influence on a winning team, that is not something that I'm always associated with him. Let's just put it that way.
I mean, to be fair, he was a driving force in the regular season for the Knicks, and they were winning games.
Occasionally, because there are times where he had seasons where he was just all over the place himself offensively, where he would shoot the Knicks out of games just as often as he would shoot them back into it. Like, I do think the volatility of this offense, which, like you said, all over the place, is not going to help them. Towns, for all the contractual stuff, was still a very consistent offensive performer. And while Gobert kind of took a lot of those rebounds away from him, he was a consistent presence on the glass too. He was always a big, wide body who knew how to place himself, even though he wasn't quote unquote a good defender, so to speak. Like he was able to clock the paint up. We're not seeing that to the same extent. McDaniels, however, I'm glad you gave him that shout out because this is something I've been complaining about for years. For years. Like him just being able to take more open shots, or rather having the willingness to do so, and him acknowledging, hey, I need to be more of an offensive factor. Good on him. We're seeing some contribution there that I didn't expect from him. Nas Reed, also still the same guy, but everything around that has been volatile as hell. We know that Rudy Gobert can have games where he scores 17 and he follows that up with 5. So we know he's not a consistent presence. We know that Randall, for all what he's done this year, we know that there's still some inconsistencies to his jump shot. You know, sometimes it'll be on, sometimes it'll be way off. He'll shoot his way out of games. Anthony Edwards, not much different, I'm afraid, at times. Like he's still a young guy. He'll get overconfident. He'll take bad shots. Like it's just collectively, there's too much turmoil. Like you, I don't trust the offense. I don't necessarily understand where the hell they're tracking. I hope we're going to get a response within the last, 9 games of the regular season. I don't think that's going to tell us a whole lot, but you're right. They're all over the place.
And I wonder, I mean, I guess Gobert technically counts as someone who draws fouls because teams will willingly foul him, but I feel like they need someone, especially when you get to the playoffs and you're looking at some of their secondary lineups, like someone other than Anthony Edwards or Julius Randle needs to be able to draw fouls, and they just don't have it on this team. And when you kind of boil that down to, okay, there could be certain spacing limitations in the half court, especially depending on the level of opponent you're going up against. And then now or at least again, it feels like they feel like they can't play Mike Conley as much. And he's getting older and he has, has dealt with a bunch of wrist stuff, I believe, this year. So that would make sense. I still just like since February 1st, they're a top 10 offense and defense, and yet they're still 14-10, and that's not really spectacular. I think I've seen enough against them at high-end competition where I don't know this stretch specifically. I don't know that I need this just feels kind of like an extension of who they are. So maybe it should be high on a scale of 1 to 10. But if I was to do an overall trust meter of the Wolves, I'm going to give them a 5.5 simply because I can't quit them. Like, I just feel like their top end outcome is they made the NBA finals. Like that is how good I feel about this team's peak. I just have yet to see anything that makes me believe they would sustain their apex for a long enough to make it out of 3 playoff series in the even fucking 1 in the West more.
Yeah, I'm not a believer this year whatsoever. I do think it's fair, like in terms of the Gobert stuff, you said he used to get to the line. He doesn't really anymore. But there's a larger question, I think, that has arisen. Has Rudy Gobert started his decline this year? Like when watching games, I don't necessarily feel as though we're seeing a dramatically lessened version of him. But when you dig into the numbers, you're seeing it all over the place in virtually every statistical category, even the advanced metrics as well, where you're seeing a diminished version of him. And it's interesting because, he is older, and we also know that some big men who are especially tall like him can have a tendency to dramatically fall off one year to the next. Are we looking at a decline that's been initiated?
I mean, if it's a decline, I don't think that it's been he is still can be the anchor of an elite defense.
Sure.
And so it's sort of like, has LeBron James decline type territory? I'm not putting him on the same level of LeBron, but it's okay. Yeah. 80% of LeBron is still one of the 15 best players in the NBA. 80% of Rudy Gobert is still one of the 5 to 10 most valuable defenders in the NBA. I think I do wonder what might be a problem with him is that when you look at this team, and it was probably to some extent a problem last year too, I don't know that they have enough guys who understand where he needs to get the ball or how to use him. And part of that is just, we know they have Mike Conley, Rob Dillingham not playing a ton at the moment, going through a feeling out process. Julius Randle's never necessarily been that level of passer. And I think, look, we put, and rightfully so, a ton of pressure on Anthony Edwards, but he's still so young. And so
Right.
like I don't think that he's not an A+ passer right now. And I don't know that
No.
he's comfortable like putting the ball where fully comfortable like putting the ball where Rudy's going to want it the most. Like you need someone who's more of a game manager to do that. And aside from Mike Conley, like you just don't have that. And so I think if there's been a regression from him, it almost feels like he's less reliable on the offensive end than ever before. Or at least he's exploring peaks and valleys like more dramatically than he did in the past. And I think you could definitely, I think when you look at his movement on defense, you could definitely see like, okay, it feels like he might be a step or two slower, but I can't bring myself to maybe they go up against a certain playoff matchup and that gets exposed for some reason. But if we're still talking about, one of the 10 most valuable defenders in the NBA,
Oh
it's
yeah,
just
yeah,
not
yeah.
something that I would be worried about.
Oh yeah, not like, I'm not calling him Clint Capella or anything. Like that's not where we are. I just think it's interesting, right? Because he is getting to that age, and like I said, when I watch him play, like yeah, occasionally I'll notice like a glimmer of something, but ultimately, it's not something that's recognizable. But it's just when you dig into the numbers, you kind of start to see a pattern, and then you kind of make the assumption as well, like, all right, well, he's just wrapping up his age 32 season. Is he going to be able to actually rebound or get in the year 33? Like, is that going to be a thing? Like, or are we going to see like this version of him for a couple of years, and then the drop off is going to be like legit? I don't know, but I do think that they have to like look at that situation and say, all right, like he's not getting any younger. If we want the best out of Gobert moving forward, you're right. Like let's get a point guard in here who knows how to give him the ball. Let's actually try to activate him a little bit more offensively. Because
I think,
yeah,
by the way, Dillingham might be that. I think if you were to ask me who's like their second best lob creator, I might go with, or passer, however you want to frame it. I would
right.
probably go with Rob Dillingham or maybe even Dante DiVincenzo. I think is maybe a little underrated in that area. And I don't know if that's, I mean, this season, that's probably not a high enough ceiling, but yeah, I get where you're saying on that. Like it might be Rob Dillingham, but that's going to take time. And in that time, Rudy Gobert is not going to get any younger.
So how do we feel about Minnesota going into next season with all the contractual stuff going on though?
That's a whole different separate discussion when you have his
I
Nas
know.
Reed, the player. I need to know what's going to happen with the Randall and Nas Reed player options before
Right.
but like, I, this team, it feels closer than their uneven performance reflects. And so if they're going to somehow figure out how to bring back this core, it does feel like a matter of maybe bringing some futzing and fiddling where can you get another like mid-end game manager in here? Is
Right.
there a trade that they figure to be a part of the Kevin Durant sweepstakes, depending, I think, on how the Julius Randle free agency shakes out? I think the problem here's where there would be a problem with the Wolves reaches critical mass. If you don't believe that with Anthony Edwards and like Mike Conley on the decline, and then however you feel about Dillingham, if you don't think there is a realistic path with most of this group here to them being, I would say, a more consistent or versatile offensive team, that's when you really have to start having some wholesale discussions. Our next team, second to last team, I believe, if I'm not mistaken here, we move on to the Phoenix Suns, who I've seen just a lot of, have they turned things around? If you're basing on the turnaround, like this is the Mickey Mouse March question. Like this is the team that perhaps this exercise is for more than anybody else here. In the month of March, they are 7th in offense, 23rd in defense, 6-5. A lot of positive developments for them. Osei Godaro playing more. He's been great as sort of like malleable defensively. The passing of the short roll is still there. They probably need him to be like show some more aggression or physicality on offense. Like, okay, the floater is cool, but like, please go up to the rim a little bit more. Uh, is it a coincidence that Beal's hamstring injury has kind of coincided with this recent winning streak that they're on? I continue to marvel at Kevin Durant. I don't know if you saw the game against Milwaukee on Tuesday night, but Eddie
Glimpses.
Johnson, it's crunch time and the Wolves are down by 2. And he says on air, he's like, just get the ball to Kevin Durant, please. 2 seconds later, ball to Kevin Durant, 3-pointer, go ahead, 3-pointer. Makes a huge difference, of course. I continue to, Devin Booker playing better, of course, too. But I think, and by the way, I think Devin Booker is at his best when kind of like a big man type, like a big man who can decision make. I don't know that you need to have a lob threat next to Devin Booker so much as a big like Oso who could decision make.
Right.
I think that's when he's at his best. Let's start here. Scale of 1 to 10. How much do you buy the March Phoenix Suns?
uh, not a lot. What are we at? Like Durant had 42 the other night, 4.2.
I think that's fair. I just don't like. It's cool that they've seemed to have unearthed some things about their team that worked, and I would argue like the OSO button should have been pushed a lot sooner. I just yes, do I believe in Devin Booker? Do I believe in Kevin Durant? But like they're going through this. They're 6-5. And like, are we basing this all off of like in March? Are we just basing this off of a mini winning streak? I can't. Like what? Honestly, what? Why
This
should
was a
we?
team that was supposed to win 60, and we're sitting here talking about them after going 6-5.
I want to make this clear. I missed on them because I probably hit their over, and I definitely had them in the playoff discussion. I
Right.
ended up picking the Blazers to make the play-in over them. That's not aging particularly well. But like, even if they make it out of the play-in, which by the way, I wouldn't guarantee, because if you have to beat the Clippers and or the Timberwolves to get there, like you're gonna, at this rate, it's not even, they have no chance of getting to a 7-8 spot. So you're gonna have to win 2 play-in games. I'm not gonna pick them to do that. And then if they do, okay, good, they're gonna get slaughtered by Oklahoma City in round 1. I just, what if you can you sell, is there a devil's advocate case here? I tried to approach this from the devil's advocate perspective, and I think that, okay, there might be a top end lineup here that works, but it might not include Bradley Beal. And what does that look like? I guess politically, like you're just not gonna like you're just not gonna play Bradley Beal if he's healthy.
Not
I would say
playing him and not starting him. I mean, that those are two, or giving him a featured role, I should say, because he's not starting.
right.
Or
So
two
I'm
different
just,
ways.
but my whole thing is just I I don't have like that. Okay, it's been like this. All right, this recent stretch is fun, and we get to see Kevin Durant in the playoffs. Like that's always cool. I guess there's sort of the any given Sunday effect when you have players like Devin
Right.
Booker and Kevin Durant here. But like, I just I can't get there on this team. Like it's, we've seen a little bit, like we have to shout him out because it's the Hardwood Knocks podcast of all podcasts. Like it's been cool to see Cody Martin has had utility now when he's healthy. I just like I don't know how to feel about this team other than I think they're a sham. And this
Okay.
recent stretch hasn't necessarily changed that for me, where all right, they might be a play-in team. I still think I would be fairly surprised if they make it out of the play-in. Never mind having to get into the playoffs and then beat the 1 seed, who are
Right.
going to be the Thunder.
No, this is definitely the most disappointing team in the entire league to me this year, and this recent stretch doesn't. I'm almost confused as to why we included them. I don't think they've. Yeah, they broke their pattern of having a winning record and actually playing a little bit as they were supposed to. But again, this team with these players, at least Booker, Durant, even ignoring Beal, Jones, O'Neal, Allen, and so on, like this was supposed to be a team that won 50. Like I was joking when I said 60 earlier, but like 50 should have been within the wheelhouse. And now we're talking about them because they went 5 or 6-5. Was it 6-5?
They're 6-5 in March, and
Yeah.
they're on a 4-game winning streak.
Yeah.
Oh, so, yeah, 4-game winning streak. Which during that time, like they have real win. Well, they have wins over Cleveland and Milwaukee. Like
They
those
do.
still matter, especially the Cleveland one because Cleveland was full
The
strength, I believe. Yeah.
right. So like it's a weird month, right? That's why we're doing this pod though. It's I have a zero faith left in him. Durant wants out. We know this. Like this is a marriage that's about to end. We know this. So like that just hovers in my head every single time I'm watching them. Like, oh, Durant's just playing out the year. Like he's just waiting. I still think he loves ball to the point where he's like, yeah, if we have a chance to win it, I'm gonna try to do it. But are we sure he's gonna go balls to the wall for the remaining 10 games and try to make it through?
Yeah, that's he. I mean, I don't have that. Wouldn't be. I buy like him doing that, but I also there is kind of the problem of, well, what are the stakes here?
Right.
Because are you what is the outcome where it ends with that they would decide to keep Kevin Durant around and kind of run this back a little bit? I don't like. Does that scenario even exist? What does that look like? Just
That's the
making
thing.
it to the playoffs can't count as that, right?
No, I see. That's the thing. I've counted that out. I don't remember a situation where a guy like Kevin Durant, a featured guy like him, was basically so determined that, yeah, you know what, we're probably gonna split our ways like this summer. Like we're gonna go our separate ways. That's why I'm surprised you're like, oh yeah, Durant's gonna go balls out.
You said it though. You made the case for him. It's a cliche, but like he loves ball. Like he just
He does
plays.
love ball, but he also knows that he has to finish on his own terms and in his own way. Like, does he want to give everything he's got at this age over the last 10 games of the season to make some, let's be honest, pointless attempt in the play-in to risk injury and then go into the summer with major uncertainties, knowing full well that that's when he can, quote unquote, pick and choose his next team? I don't know the answer to that.
I just that would be on the scale of things that I'm doubting. Like I just don't have like the Kevin Durant aspect of his performance level would be the least. I just don't. I don't know how to apply what I've seen to like the short term picture for them. I think it's probably just even if they've discovered some things. Look, I think Bud leaning into just like when Kevin Durant's on the bench, like I think we've just objectively seen more of, oh, it's Devin Booker, Tyus Jones, and like a bunch of like Osos in there. There's a bunch of defensive versatility, whether it's Cody Martin, who I want to be clear has not necessarily been good offensively. Like his 4 games with them, like he's done some nice defensive things. I like, okay, that's a blueprint, but like you didn't tap into that until March. And that's a problem when you're going to have to win. And we've yet to see a 10 seed make the playoffs. So they would be the first. I guess you could look at the top of the roster and say, oh, because Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are here, they can absolutely do it. But Minnesota and the Clippers at full strength are good teams. So I think what we've seen is encouraging and there are real takeaways. Like I think they have some scrappier lineups that they've cobbled together. I like Oso getting more minutes. You said like Dunn as well. But it's like I don't know. I'm probably at like a 4.2 probably feels reasonable. And I think that's probably even high.
It's I think to me why I'm so skeptical of this team is not just Durant. Knowing that situation is about to end in a couple of months. It's also like you have no control over your draft pick situation, like what's going to happen with Book. I think he's well aware that with Durant on the way out, he's like thinking long term, going, what the hell is this? And you can't tell me that these human beings do not have that in the back of their minds at some level.
And here's my thing though, what does that have to do with what we're actually discussing?
Well, because I think at the end of the day, now that this sort of thing that the rug has been pulled out and we know what's about to happen and the future is so insecure or uncertain rather. I do think that is going to play a part in their individual performance. I think it's going to play a part in their team-oriented performance. I think to the point where can we trust them moving forward is sort of like we have to bake that in. We have to bake in the fact that there could be a scenario wherein we just can't trust not the effort level. That's the wrong word to use.
But that actually the give a shit factor might be
right. Yeah, right.
Okay. Yeah, and based off what we've seen for stretches of the season, I think that's fair. I guess it just because it's the 11th hour, it's the closing kick. I would think the give a shit factor won't be an issue, but I didn't even mean to sound so dismissive when I was asking you that. I guess I was just a little bit confused about your point. Is what happens if this team loses 2 in a row now? Like then what? Like let's see how they respond from that.
But you do raise a good point though, just in terms of the Beal factor, right? Because he's kind of the constant there. I was sort of surprised. Still, I'm not going to go back to the whole trade. I was surprised at just like the overlap between him and Book, and people were like, "Oh yeah, this is going to work." Yeah, like I still thought they would win 50, and that was with like the negative aspect of too much positional overlap between Book and Beal. So for them to be where they are right now, it what's the word I'm looking for? Deflated. That was the word I've been looking for the past 5 minutes. Watching this team, it does feel like almost every damn member on the court, minus the rooks though, just look consistently deflated. That matters to me as well. Like body language, I know it's like an inexact science, and it's something that can be really utilized in a very wrong way. Like, oh, a guy is shaking his head, that means he hates his teammates. Like, no, that's ridiculous. But like, every time someone fails to come back home on defense, for example, every time they make like a big blunder, look at how they're all like just completely deflated, given up, like looking at each other almost like blamey. There's just something. Is the word toxic fair to use here about this team?
There's definitely something toxic. I guess I just over the winning streak, it just hasn't felt. It just hasn't felt that
Right.
way. But you can't dismiss. Okay, we're talking about. Let's even be general. We're talking about 11 games worth of positivity here, or something,
Right.
or 10 games worth of positivity. You don't get to dismiss like the other 60.
I just don't think this streak has moved the needle for me whatsoever.
Let's move on to our final team. And I would argue, I'm curious what you think. They're the second best feel good story in the league this season, right? The Portland Trailblazers.
They're fun. They're fun, and they've found something. Absolutely.
They are more. This is since February 1st. This is not just Mickey Mouse March for them. This has been like a couple months in the making. They're 16th in offense since February 1st, 8th in defense, 2nd in half court defense during that time. Denny Avdia has been balling. Donovan Clingan has looked great. He's played more minutes amid injuries to both RW3 and DeAndre Ayton. They are like, this team is like, we know how we feel. Everyone knows on this podcast how we feel about Tamani Kamara. Scoot Henderson's made some strides this year. Before he was dealing with an injury, like they were even getting some pretty good minutes from Jabari Walker. This team is, you don't have to look. Well, let's start here very quickly. Who do you think gets the final play-in spot in the West? It's Dallas, Phoenix, or Portland. Who would you pick?
I just spent like 10 minutes questioning the Suns. And like, this is like, okay, I want the Blazers because of this. Like, I want them to get in there because I think that would be the most fun part. But it feels like Phoenix, just on almost a technicality and just the fact that they do have Durant and Booker who will like sleepwalk into 25 points each, that they would appear to be that team. I question whether any of them should get like a real shot. No, I mean, the Blazers are deserving well, fans are deserving of watching the Blazers, I would rather say, because they play a fun brand of basketball. But I do think Phoenix is going to take it.
They have, look, as we record this, 3 games ahead in the loss column. That's a tough gap to make up at this point. Phoenix does have the toughest remaining schedule, so there's that to consider. There's also the element of, though, how much does Portland want this? I've seen a lot of back and forth with their fans, and I think it's a valid question of why fight to play and like lean into the lottery odds. Just at this rate, when you kind of look at how the NBA draft order is shaking up, you're not. If they make the play-in, they're not going to make it out of the play-in. So like you're still going to be in the lottery. And it's like, what's the difference between being, I guess you could say, they're going to be 12th or like 13th versus what, like a 10th? Okay, like if you or 9th, like if you want that, I totally understand it. So short term, I think this is just cool to see because for the most part, I could use a little less Jeremy Grant. I'm not going to lie. Like they are doing this with players who matter beyond this season. And I think like even one of the things that could frustrate me at times with them is that they weren't playing fast enough on offense to kind of make up for their I guess talent deficit or just like raw playmaking deficit. They're second in transition frequency since February 1st. Only 27th in efficiency, but I like that they're getting out on the break even more. They're still kind of bad in the half court, but like they're second in the number of plays they generate when it comes to second chance opportunities. There's a lot of good things to like about this team to where now, do I want them to hit the acceleration button over the offseason? No. But I buy, like, when you're trying to evaluate this team against, okay, how many of these guys who are performing, or maybe let's say outperforming your initial expectations, do you think are realistically, okay, let's not assume this is their current baseline, but we think they could be a part of the future of a really good team? Denny Avdia, Timani Kamara, Donovan Clingan, Scoot Henderson. I'm still kind of all over the place with Shaedon Sharpe, but he's like electric enough in the way he hits some tough shots and the way he can move off the ball.
He's too young to like be relinquished right now in terms of like.
No, I'm not saying trade him. I'm just saying the confidence level of, they have these long-term prospects in place. Like Duop Reith giving him some minutes right now amid injuries. That's like a joke there, but I love Duop Reith. So I look at this team and I think I'm curious to see what they do because he's headed into a contract year. But the gravity of Anthony Simons is irreplaceable given the current personnel. So like they probably have between 5 and 7 guys who they can point to and say, okay, we don't know who's going to be the best player on our team in 3 years. You hope it would be Scoot. Like that's still the hope. But like if you have to move visions around or like wait on finding that best player. I think you look at all of those guys, and with the exception of maybe Scoot, if you decide you need to scale Scoot down, you feel like these players can be a part of any iteration of Blazers basketball in which you're headed. And I don't even mean that as a to denigrate Scoot Henderson, who I think has had a really good year, and I would actually like to see him play more than he has. So like is even currently playing.
Agreed.
But like I think if you move Scoot into like an even more scaled down role, I don't know how he would handle playing off of like someone or two people who are a notch or two above him in the pecking order. But like that's the overarching like premise that I have here. Like if you believe in it, like that's a big deal. If you're saying like, okay, there are these 5 to 6 guys that
Mhm.
we know, like we don't necessarily know like what the makeup of our team is exactly going to be, but we know that they can be a part of it. And that's what I'm buying about what we've seen. And I
Yep.
think to narrow it down even further, I buy the defense because you look at the personnel and it's all right, yeah, that largely makes sense. When you have Tamani Kamara, Denny Avdia, like they can be fucking huge and versatile at the same time.
Yes, they can. I agree with your point and the fact that they can go into this offseason knowing full well that they had those guys. I do say I think it's fair to still wonder like who is the number one guy, and that's you're gonna have to take some time to figure that out. But there's also a part of me that thinks the clock is still spinning. Like you're not necessarily you can't allow yourself too much time to like I don't want to say waste, but you need to figure out who that primary guy is going to be fairly quickly. Like if you don't have the answer to that by like the trade deadline next year, then I wonder like what the plan is going to morph into compared to where it is now. Like
Yeah.
they're a fun story, they're a fun team, but like you also need a direction. You also need to have like a primary guy. Like Avdiva has played like one recently. Can he sustain that over a full season? I don't know the answer to that if he can.
I did say this to Grant on one of our most recent pods. I would kill to see what Avdia or even like a Scoot, when you look at some of the struggles they've had, like with their finishing at points this year, or for Scoot since he entered the league, basically.
Right.
Um, like if there was just like another shooter on this team, like to open up the floor in the half court for them. But I think that's a really good point about the trade deadline, especially because so Sharp extension eligible this summer, Scoot extension eligible next summer. Like those are
Right.
and Anthony Simon's going into a contract year. You're absolutely right.
Sharp is like already that's his third season. That's insane. That went by so quickly. Like his first 3 years. I was like, oh, he's a second year guy, right? No, but I completely forgot that he was a third year guy.
Is he? He's one of those. There's always those guys where you look at the shot, and even when it's not going in, you just kind of feel like, all right, he's going to shoot
Yep.
37% on real volume
Yep.
from three. He's
He's
shooting
that
under
guy.
25% from three in March. And I'm just
Yep.
like, no, you know what? Like in terms of just a complimentary shooter, I just trust that's eventually going to go in.
Yeah, same. Look, he's never been like a quote unquote good 3 point shooter. Like first year, 36% decent, and like I thought he'd build on that, and then it's just kind of regressed ever since. But like I agree with you. Every shot he takes when he's got his feet planted looks good. Everything about that shot release, the form, everything just looks on point. I, I guess it's just a maturation issue. Like again, he's 21. He's not even 22 yet. Like I have to assume that's going to come to. Like, let's have this conversation 12 months from now. If this is still an issue, oh boy.
I'm going to paint this picture. I buy
Okay.
8 of 10 what we've seen defensively from them. I still have some questions about, you know, Donovan Klingen's versatility on the defense. We know what he does best, but like how he's going to handle certain matchups. And then some questions about how their transition ends up folding because they're big and versatile, but they're not necessarily the quickest team at getting back. Their offense, I don't know, like there are some lineups that are killing it right now. And just we talked about what Avdia specifically is done as like a scorer, as a playmaker.
Mhm.
I think I have to go as a league average offense, which is basically what they've been. I'm probably more like a with this current personnel, like a 3 to a 4 in that. Like there are certain lineups that could work, but overall, and then I think in their overall vision or just their overall outlook of a future, I'm probably like between a 7 and an 8 overall because even if they reach some of those inflection points that you're talking about, I think they like I guess the only way they won't reach that inflection point leading into the next trade deadline, or even let's say the 2026 offseason, is do they somehow win the lottery this year? Or
Yeah.
is our next year we talking about Scoot as the most improved player in the NBA? Like those are kind of the only, unless you think Sharp still has that ability. I just don't, as an on ball guy and a facilitator.
He's like a secondary guy. Like He's the guy you put next to the ball dominant superstar, I think.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. So I think their overall, I don't even know. I don't even know if I want to say vision, because I don't think that they're necessarily close to the actualized version that they're trying to reach. But their overall situation, I'm probably like between a 7 and an 8 when you're looking at the long term.
I think I'm a little bit lower, a little bit, not much, but like 6.
You make me think I should go lower just because if you can't point and say, which I can't do, I would bet that I think it can be Scoot still. But if you can't point and say, okay, this is the guy
That's the thing.
moving forward, they just have so many guys that it makes me feel good about offsetting that a little bit. So I'll stick between like, I'll go 7.2.
Yeah. All right. I mean, look, that's cool. Because I understand the quantity argument, and I don't think it's a bad one, because you do want to have like a small army of guys, young guys, to go into next season with, because it sort of kind of gives you more optionality. It gives you more options to see who pops. Like, it's more bites as the apple. But I just think every one of these guys is like such a big step away from being like the primary player that has me a little bit cautious. Like, I agree with you that I do still think Henderson is like the one to reach it, if anyone. Because Klingon defensively, sure, I agree with everything you said. Like, strong ass rim protector, like he's gonna figure that out. He's gonna be like their defensive anchor. It's gotta be Scoot. Like, if it's not Scoot, I just don't see who else here can step up to that plate.
You would have to believe that Avdia is going to have the Lowry Markkanen type mid-career explosion, and I just don't.
Right.
He does more on ball, so it's a little bit more intriguing, but it's just, even if he becomes an all-star, to be in the club, like, this is the guy that we want to structure everything around. I do believe that you're correct, that there's only Scoot and that they don't really have another realistic.
He becomes Markkanen, like, is that good enough?
He's so much different as a player that if he was to have that explosion, I think he ends up being a lot better than Markkanen because of the stuff he does defensively and on the ball.
Yeah, he would need to be better than
But what is his? The 100th percentile outcome for him is what? A top what? He would probably be on like the Jamal Murray level of stardom.
Yeah, that actually feels pretty appropriate.
And if we know anything about the Denver Nuggets, that's not going to be good enough as like the main star.
And that's the thing. So at best, Avdivac tops out as like a second guy on a good team. At best, which just leaves you with that gaping hole of not having the number one. You know what? Screw it. Tumani Kamara is gonna like take a big offensive leap next year.
Honestly, I think Duop Reith is gonna be Karl Anthony Towns with better defense. So maybe it's him.
Jabari Parker or Jabari Parker. Jabari Walker.
Wow.
I couldn't even get his name right.
Shots fired.
Yeah, it's definitely the next up, right? No, I want to see more out of their young guys for sure, also next year, but I'm also kind of rooting for them to get some lottery luck, because God, do they need like a number one, which might lead into our next pod, perhaps.
Ooh, nice little teaser. Until then, though, can you tell the fine folks, our listeners, viewers, subscribers, where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
You can find me over at Blue Sky at MSJ NBA, where I share my work from Yahoo Sports, from Forbes, from the NBA podcast, and also share links to the Danish podcast Buzzer Beater if you're so inclined.
As always, Mort, thank you for all your insight and your OnlyFans promo codes. I love those. And until next time, and as always, we leave everybody with the shout out to the one, the only, the player who could maybe become the number one for the Portland Trailblazers if they're smart enough to pick him up.
Delano Benson. Yep.
Mr. Frank Ntilikina.